Despite being rather small in stature, Angela Merkel casts a long shadow. And whoever takes over as leader of Germany's Christian Democrats will have big shoes to fill. Who can do the job? And what is Mutti Merkel's legacy? Merkel's party, the CDU, votes this week for its new leader, and whoever wins is most likely to fight to be Germany's chancellor in September's national elections. And that will mean an end to Merkel's 16 years at the head of Europe's biggest economy. Good to have your company on Roundtable. I'm David Foster. We will be asking Angela Merkel's biographer what kind of person she really is, and looking at what it will take to be the person who replaces her. After 16 years in Germany's top job, and even longer as figurehead of the Christian Democratic Union Party, Angela Merkel will be stepping down later this year. The contest to become the new head of the CDU comes to a climax this week with a leadership election. Among the three candidates, her biggest rival in the party, Friedrich Merz. He wants to move the party more to the right to win over voters and has repeatedly criticized Merkel for lacking leadership. Armin Laschet is the premier of North Rhine-Westphalia and viewed as the closest to a continuation of the Merkel era. And there's Norbert Röttgen, a foreign policy expert who favors the center ground. The CDU's popularity has been boosted by Merkel's competent handling of the pandemic, with far lower infection rates in Germany than in neighboring countries. So the winner of this week's leadership contest will be in a strong position to succeed her as leader of Europe's political and economic powerhouse. Well, I'm very pleased to say that we can go straight to Germany, to Hamburg, in fact, and welcome to this round table foreign policy expert Ulrich Kuhn. Then to London, where we see Matthew Qvortrup, author of the book Angela Merkel, Europe's most influential leader. And then to Glossop, also in the UK, where we see Simon Bulmer, Emeritus Professor of European Politics at Sheffield University. Great to have you all with us. I think we're going to split this into three, possibly more parts. It's going to be Angela Merkel's personality, her achievements or lack of them, and then what happens next. So, Matthew, let me come to you first of all. In terms of her personality, her character, what do you make of somebody who lists their favourite food as potato soup? Rather dull?
Well, I don't think it's particularly dull. I think Margaret Thatcher likes shepherd's pie. I mean, that literally is a matter of taste. I think you can name all sorts of other things for her. I mean, the first album she bought was the Beatles, but now she listens to Wagner. Somebody who celebrates her 50th birthday by organizing a lecture on the brain and the biology of the brain. That's very different from people who have different lifestyles, such as the still current president of the United States, I suppose, or the Prime Minister of Britain. So I think we have a very serious person, but also in some ways a complex personality. I mean, she's also listed Heinrich Böll, who is a writer from the left, as her favorite writer. So then all sorts of things that make up her personality. But I think the main thing about her personality is being incredibly meticulous and doing things very much after a lot of preparation. She, like Margaret Thatcher, actually is trained as a scientist. And I think that approach to politics, which is based on science and rationality and a little dose of the Protestant work ethic, those are the things that characterize Angela Merkel.
Okay, maybe dull was a little bit unkind, but I just used it as an example of some of the things that people have said about her. So, Ulrich, let me come to you and say she's been described as the opposite of a showman. Fair?
Totally fair. And perhaps let me also get to the point that in general, Germans like this kind of leadership style, a little bit dull. Certainly no flip-flopping. Germany's biggest strategist, or considered to be its biggest strategist as a chancellor, which was Helmut Schmidt. When he invited Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, he served pea soup. So you see kind of a consistency here. And now these days, when you see on the one end of the spectrum personalities like Boris Johnson or Donald Trump or, macho man Vladimir Putin, then clearly Angela Merkel is the opposite to that. And she wants to be the opposite of that. She wants to be a reliable leader, someone who is prepared, someone who does her job. Protestant work ethics, I think that captures it extremely well. And once that job is done, she goes into retirement. And this is what's going to happen this year.
Simon, is she somebody who has cultivated this type of personality, or has it just come naturally given her upbringing in the austere times of East Germany, etc.?
I think it has come partly from her upbringing. You could say she's quite analytical, and I suppose that comes from the scientist background. And I don't think either of the other speakers have mentioned this, but she has sort of cultivated a normalcy. Perhaps this is what you mean by the description dull, but the normalcy is a good vehicle for the public to identify with her, and she has been able to carry public opinion on many crisis issues, including latterly the COVID-19 crisis.
And equally, she is somebody who just likes to get on with the job. This was what she had to say after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when she moved from the east through the wall to the west and was asked by somebody what she was going to do for the rest of the night. She said, I'd rather go home. I had to get up early the next morning. I had already got rather too carried away by my standards. She has, in her eyes, always a job to do.
Well, I think that's correct, but I think at the same time she went to the sauna that night and had a beer, one. So it's sort of so she was getting a little bit carried away, but within reason, and it's that sort of being able to control herself, I think, is the key to it, and I think we talk about her being very disciplined and so on. But there have been quite a lot of politicians who've been very disciplined, even if they have not been very much like her. Somebody like Margaret Thatcher was very disciplined as a politician, and so I think and of course was also a scientist by training. So I think that, and I think she was brought up as Methodist, but Margaret Thatcher was. So there's some sort of similarities between Margaret Thatcher and Angela Merkel. Of course, the main difference being differences in political outlook.
Ulrich, I'll come to you in just a moment, but let me throw this one at you, Simon. In terms of her achievements, we've covered her personality. She's pragmatic. Some might say rather colourless, but in fact, she just sees it as a way of getting on with things. But what about her achievements or lack of? What would you say the high spot of her 16 years as Chancellor actually was?
Well, she's been very prominent on the European political stage, and I think seeing through the crises that have befallen the European Union, the Eurozone crisis, the Ukraine civil war, that crisis with Russia, particularly important. The migration crisis, of course, was a little bit more contentious. She started off with a very welcoming approach towards the refugees, but when the numbers continued and domestic politics shifted, the ground shifted beneath her feet, as it were, she had to change tack. So I mean, of course, I'm particularly focused on the European Union, but I do think that has been a big contribution. It's been a considerable area where she has been an element of continuity, not a sort of visionary politician like some others in the European Union, but somebody who has been, I guess, a welcoming sight at European Council meetings for her counterparts, that she's still there and she's going to help us broker a solution to take things forward.
Well, I'm sure you remember that fantastic picture of her standing at the table looking at Donald Trump as if to say, who on earth do you think you are, Mr. President? It sort of summed up the fact that she was a no-nonsense politician as well. Well, since Simon mentions the refugee crisis, Ulrich, let me come to you on that. She has extraordinary popularity ratings at the moment. Between 70 and 72% say they're satisfied or very satisfied with what she has achieved. If that was a low point when the refugees came in and she misread the situation, has she turned it to her advantage with the way the German economy is still growing?
Well, I think, to be honest, at the moment, everyone is, just impacted by the corona crisis. So that's kind of like an overlay, and people are not really talking about the political decisions that happened before. I would still think that the refugee crisis, that will be the big question mark that will be added to Angela Merkel's career in the end. Clearly, there is a mixed track record here. And the decision is still supported by most Germans. Still, most Germans think the decision back then was correct. But also people understood quickly that it was not backed up by any real concept, and that it was horribly communicated, really horribly communicated, domestically as well as to the partners in the European Union. So in general, Angela Merkel is not a very good communicator. And in those kind of crisis situations, you need people that can also communicate and relate to what is called the ordinary people. Angela Merkel has learned from her mistakes. In the corona crisis, she is now these days much better at communicating, but still the refugee crisis also opened kind of the floodgates for all those very right-leaning conservative leaders throughout Europe. I think it has emboldened politicians like Boris Johnson, but it also led to the rise of the new German right, the Alternative for Germany.
Back to you, Simon, and I will come to you in just a moment, Matt. I noted that you said to one of my producers that you thought that Angela Merkel, in a sense, may have contributed to Brexit. Does that echo what we were just hearing from Ulrich?
Contributed to Brexit? I'm not sure that she did contribute to Brexit very much, to be perfectly honest. I think where the British government went to with Chancellor Merkel, particularly under David Cameron, was a view that because she was the kind of leading figure in the European Union, she would be the person who would determine the outcome, first of all, with the renegotiations, and principally the renegotiations. And I think to an extent, Theresa May carried on with that, misreading the fact that the European Commission negotiators were in fact in charge of the negotiations. Merkel was very much in the background. I mean, in the popular psyche, I think there's always a receptive part of British public opinion that sees that the European Union ruled by Germany and will now transfer that to Ursula von der Leyen in the European Commission. But my personal view is that Merkel didn't really contribute to Brexit happening.
Or perhaps a rise in populism might have been a better way of putting it. Matthew, what about the economic crisis of 2008? Did she handle that well as far as Germany and the rest of Europe were concerned?
Well, I think she handled it extremely well. I remember I spoke to her at the time, and in just after one of the summits, and I say, "Are we all social democrats now? Because you have now, as a conservative politician, presided over a state intervention at a completely hitherto unknown level." And she responded back, "We will have as much market economics as necessary, as much state intervention as is necessary as well." And I said to her, "Well, that's a quote by a social democrat from the 1960s. And she says, "Well, that may well be the case. I was in East Germany at the time. I didn't pay attention. But if that's necessary, then we go for it." And I think she did what was necessary at the time. She was able to, at that stage, or willing to, read up on the subject. She made decisions very late in the day, sometimes even literally, 5 to 12 at night, before the deadlines and so on. So she was able to handle that crisis because she had that little bit of a run-up to that. And I think Ulrich will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in 2015 or 14, the new Jugendwort des Jahres, a youth word of the year, was to Merkel or Merkelen, which was translated as sort of take your time and dawdle a little bit and consider all your options and make your decision. And that's what she did in the crisis in 2008. That's what she did with the Euro crisis in around 2010. And that's also what she did with, to a degree, with COVID, where she was a little bit slow to start with, but also when Russians had invaded Ukraine. She also went, she prevaricated and she thought long and hard about it, and then she made a decision. So I think, and that's of course what she did not do with the refugee crisis, because she didn't have the luxury of time. But I think she's handled the economic crisis incredibly well, and of course was one of the people who coordinated that, not least with Gordon Brown here in the United Kingdom.
Let's talk about what happens next, who comes next, and Ulrich, where do you want to start?
What comes next, or who comes next? Well, first of all, on Saturday we're going to have the big party convention of the Conservatives, the CDU, and it will be interesting to see which one of those three candidates will emerge as the winning successor. But it's important to understand that the leader of the party will not necessarily be the candidate for the chancellorship. And the candidate for the chancellorship...
You've preempted me. I wanted to come to that towards the end of the program. Can we go through the three main front runners first, starting with Armin Laschet?
Well, Armin Laschet is the most centrist of all CDU candidates. I would think that he likes to portray himself as the kind of personalized continuation of the Merkel cause, basically saying to the voter, you knew her, so you know me, so you can vote for me. He has office and governance experience in North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany's most populous state. But he also pretty much messed up this state's corona response, which has seen him fall in the polls. He is very much appealing to centrist and left-leaning voters. But then I would ask, what about those that are not so happy with the Merkel legacy anymore? I think he might be a strong candidate, but it's not clear to me whether he could really unite the Conservative Party behind himself.
Okay. Simon, what do you think about Friedrich Merz, seen as the one who is perhaps most antagonistic towards Frau Merkel and her legacy?
Yes, well, I mean, he left the field as a kind of rival and has returned. He's obviously somebody on the right, economically in particular, so possibly taking the party in a different direction, which might regain some votes, possibly from the AfD. But if the next coalition is as expected to be with the Green Party, then some kind of trimming, of compromising will be necessary should he be the successful candidate.
Is he a hard man?
And of course be the Chancellor candidate, because as Ulrich said, there is the possibility that he isn't, even if he wins the CDU leadership. Is he a hard man? I mean, he's more hard line, I would say, but I don't really think I know his personality enough to give you a full answer to that, to be perfectly honest.
And Matthew, that's two we've discussed. What about number three, Matthew, if you would, Norbert Röttgen, seen as what, the supposed outsider, if you like, of those we've mentioned already?
Yes, he's the not the favourite according to the bookmakers, but in some ways he's like the others. I think they've all studied law, which used to be the thing that German politicians did. He is a foreign policy specialist, and I think we could basically write him off. He's a very sensible, middle of the road kind of guy, but it's just he does not have the background, perhaps, really of being leader of the party. But I think what is interesting, really, about all of this is that all three candidates are in many ways not the ones that the public want. And I think it's interesting if we go back and look at Angela Merkel herself. Not the candidate in 2003. Merz back then also wanted to become the candidate, and then they had Edmund Stoiber. So there's no guarantee that would be that any of these will be the candidate. And I think Jens Spahn, I mean Ulrich will know better than I, but Jens Spahn, who's the health minister, is currently the most popular politician in Germany, followed by Markus Söder from Bavaria, who interestingly is a Protestant Bavarian. Used to be a hard man, and probably still is a hard man, used to be completely written off, and is now a possible contender for the first CSU leader from the sister party in Bavaria who could become chancellor.
Okay, so we have Ulrich mentioned there of the oddities of the system, and possibly Jens Spahn or Markus Söder running for the chancellor's job. How is it that the leader of the party won't automatically be standing come the federal elections in September?
Well, it's basically a development of German politics throughout the last decades. You know, there is the Conservative Party, Merkel's house party, the CDU, which is not participating in elections in the state of Bavaria, but there is the so-called sister party. What is a sister party? It is the CSU, which is only allowed to run for elections in Bavaria, and which since decades really is making a game out of being special, being more conservative, sometimes even pushing for Bavaria to leave Germany, perhaps the Scottish people of Germany, one could call the Bavarians. So it's interesting to see how the CSU would live with either either Merz, Laschet, or Röttgen. I do think that Markus Söder has a real chance to become the first Bavarian German chancellor ever. Then again, if you count in all the other candidates, 2 from the Green Party, 1 from the Social Democrats, you mentioned Jens Spahn, an unofficial candidate waiting in the wings. You have 8 unofficial or semi-official candidates in the running from 4 different parties. So this will be exciting.
We can't, unfortunately, go into each and every one of them on this program. Ulrich, thanks very much. A question for you first, Matthew, and then a follow-up to you, Simon, if I would. Matthew, how much will Germany miss Angela Merkel?
I think they will miss her at the personal level because she is Mutti, and we've talked about that before, and she sort of personifies Germany in that sort of, in the most possible sense of the word, boring way, because she's efficient and she works hard. But I think it is very important that Germany it's a system rather than individuals. The great playwright Bertolt Brecht once said, lucky is the country that has great heroes, but luckier still the country that doesn't need great heroes. And I think the German constitutional system, such as it is from the current constitution, is one that makes Germany the lucky country that actually will work irrespective of who is the chancellor. So it is, politically, I don't think a lot will change, but of course she is, as an individual, she will probably be missed.
Okay, I get that. Simon, what about Germany's position at the center of Europe? Will that change without Angela Merkel? Will Germany's influence recede?
I guess there'll be some impact from Merkel no longer being the German leader. I think the real issue is how far her successor is able to forge a relationship with France, because the Franco-German relationship has been a little bit tense at times recently, with the exception of the launch of the European Reconstruction Fund to deal with the economic fallout of COVID-19. So we shouldn't forget that how these constellations of political leaders in the European Union of 27 plays out. And often that's a matter of personality. Macron would become perhaps the best known political figure in the EU, and he's much more of a visionary. So how would that play with the successful candidate?
Well, one wonders also how long he's going to be at the centre of European politics, given the fact that there are French elections next year. A quick one for you, Ulrich. Has to be quick, I'm afraid. Will we ever see anybody serve as German Chancellor for as long as she has?
I think yes. Germans like this kind of steady hand. They like long chancellorships. They had Adenauer for a long time, Helmut Kohl even longer than Merkel now. Merkel 16 years. Not right now, not the next one, but perhaps the next one after.
Listen, thank you, each and every one of you, very much indeed. Fascinating to see how European politics, and in particular, given what we've been talking about, German politics, unfolds over the course of the next 12 months. I appreciate you coming on the program, and wherever you happen to be watching this edition of Roundtable, thank you very much for your company. Do it again another time, if you will. From me, David Foster, and the team, goodbye for now.